Hello, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's very exciting video. It has been a long time coming. Welcome to my January through March reading wrap up. Now, as some of you may know if you watched one of my earlier videos this year, I'm not doing a wrap up every single month. It felt repetitive because I was repeating the books that I was reading in reading vlogs, so I just thought throughout the year I'll do a few, just like cumulative, how many books I've read in the past few months. We'll get them all out there. We'll sit, we'll chat, we'll yap. We're gonna be talking for a while, or I'm gonna be talking for a while, so grab a drink, grab a book, put some headphones on, get a snack. We're gonna be sitting, talking about the books I've read so far this year. I'm really excited, but I will say that I have not read as many books as I think I just did like last year or the year before. I've definitely wanted to do quality over quantity. I found some quality books that I really enjoyed this year, but there haven't been many books that I've just like loved. We're gonna get into some of the stats so far this year, so if you're wondering the genres and the breakdown of everything, I read a total of 22 books so far in the year. My average rating is a 3.4, so this is kind of where the quality over quantity comes from. I haven't been giving like the highest of ratings to books, but I have been, focusing on what I want to read and everything like that, so it's interesting. But the genre so far this year, there's definitely been a mix, which I said I wanted to kind of like switch up different genres I've been reading, step out of my comfort zone, which I've definitely been doing, and I found, a few different genres or types of books that I really want to get into this year that I haven't really, in the past. So we have 11 romances, 3 thrillers, 3 fantasy, 2 historical fiction, 2 just regular contemporary fiction, and then 1 short story. My top authors this year are Fredrik Backman and Lane Fargo. I've read 2 of their books. A lot of these books have been in reading vlogs so far this year, so if you want to see my more like in real time reactions and everything like that, I'll link in the description what reading vlogs go with each book if they happen in a reading vlog. There have been a few books that haven't been in any reading vlogs, so that's why I'm excited to talk about them in this video, but a few of these books we have definitely talked about before. Let's get into this. So, starting my first book of 2025 was Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. Alice Feeney is one of my favorite mystery thriller authors. I actually went to her book signing for this book that came out this year, so I do have a lovely signature in here. It was so incredible because, like I said, one of my favorite mystery thriller authors. I've been reading her books since, I don't really know, it's been a few years now. Like, I've read all of her books that she's come out with. This one follows the point of view of the husband in the marriage. So the wife goes missing and she's been gone for like a year at this point, and he's actually on the phone with her when she sees someone like in the middle of the road, so she stops, tries to go help, and he's telling her like don't do that, but she does, and Grady the husband ends up going to the scene and she's no longer there. So it's been a year, she's been gone, he's been grieving, and he's also an author and he's been in kind of like a rut, so he decides to go to this very secluded island to try to get back in the groove of writing. And while he's there, it's so secluded that there's only about like 20 or so residents. Everything is very eerie, very suspicious. Every single resident he's talking to is kind of giving him a different story of like the history of the town and everything like that. So he sees someone while he's on that island that looks eerily like his wife, and he starts spiraling again. What I love so much about Alice Feeney is her plot twists get me every single time. Like, every book I read by her, I don't think I've guessed any of them. Like, she's the queen of plot twist. This one's not my favorite by her because I felt like the build up to the plot twist was like the whole, point of the book. So it was really slow, and there wasn't many like little twists between, which is what I love in like a mystery thriller, very page turning. I will say like halfway through I got very invested. I was like, okay, I need to know like what she's gonna pull at the end of it, because she always gets me, so I was excited for that. But I didn't love the setup of it. I actually started this book like 3 times before I really got into it, so it was kind of like a hard book to get into, but the ending was worth it to me. Like, she definitely got me, and she always does. So it was a good start to the year, reading one of my favorite authors and new books, but not my favorite. Then on my Kindle I read Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. I was kind of in a romantasy mood. I wanted a good romantasy, and I'd seen good reviews of this one, so I was like, you know what, it's been on my Kindle like library for a while. It was our bookmarked book club like book for that month, so I just decided to do this one next, and I was trying to find a 5-star, so I went into this with really good intentions, and I guess too high of expectations, because I really just did not enjoy this book. In this one, we're following our female main character who was actually held captive by her father when she was younger. She's bonded to these dragons, and they were torn apart, and she's held captive, and she eventually escapes that, and she's now the queen of some other area, and she teams up with the enemy of her father to try to get back the dragons. It was a very interesting like summary and plot, like the prologue of it, the setup of it, I really was enjoying, but once we got into the story, we completely lost the entire plot. And it was like, when some romantices kind of like force the romance too early on, like force the banter and like throw in tropes because the author knows that readers like really like those tropes. All of that in here just like didn't make sense. Like, the tropes were just like kind of cringy, and the banter was a bit cringy and too forced, and the summary of everything just didn't make sense because she's in hiding and they're like parading her around like the lost queen, the lost princess is found, and everything like that, and like The actual heist I was so excited about. I love a good fantasy heist. Like Six of Crows is like the standard to me, a fantasy heist, and it was just like so not on the forefront of their minds. Like they have a huge mission to get on and they were just like not focusing on it. They were like flirting at bars and like she's like twirling her hair and they're like in like such high stakes situations and like on the side flirting, and like it just, they weren't taking it very seriously, and like I was taking it more seriously than them. So I didn't love this one. I really wanted to love this one. I think it's gonna be a series of some sort, but I'm not gonna be continuing it. Then I read Winter Guarding by Kristen Hanna, one of my favorite historical fiction authors. She's the reason that I really want to get into more historical fiction this year. I've just really been enjoying reading this genre. So this one is actually about two sisters who were really close when they were younger, but they've always had this really cold mom, and she's from Russia. So when they were younger, their mom would tell them fairy tales until one day she just like completely stopped. So now it's like years later, their father's in the hospital and he's like the last link to like the family being really close. Like no one talks to each other, everyone's really cold, they're all like on their own. So while they're now grieving their father, you know, they're all kind of lost, but his one wish was like, please get your mother to tell you the fairy tales again. Like you will understand why she is so cold to you guys if you hear the fairy tale. So eventually into the book she starts saying it, and these fairy tales are actually her history. But what was really interesting about it is like you don't know which character in like her fairy tales is actually her, because you're following like her family of sorts, so you don't know which one is actually her. She never really says it because she's saying it as a fairy tale, and I loved that part. I thought it was so interesting, you know, explaining her history and like where she came from and where she grew up and all her hardships through a fairy tale. The build-up of this one was a bit too slow for me, which I usually appreciate in her books because, you know, you get to know the characters and it takes a while for you to get to know them, but by the end of her books you're so connected to them that like the ending always hits for you. But this one was a little too slow. It took a while to really get to the fairy tales, which obviously it took a while for like the mom to kind of like break down and start telling them because it's really hard for her, but it was a bit, you know, slow and a bit boring to get there. But once the fairy tale started, I was in it. I really wanted to know the history of why she's the way she is, and Kristen Hanna always like pulls these different strings at the end of them, and I always cry. This one I was really excited about because, like I said, the mom is from Russia and my mom is from Russia, so hearing her stories and everything, it's just like made me, coming out of this book, want to go like talk to my grandparents or like people older than me and hear their stories, because everyone has come from somewhere and everyone has a story. So I enjoyed this one. Not my favorite by her, but it's definitely a good read. Then I found my first 5-star of 2025, and that is The Winners by Fredrik Backman. This is the third and final book in the Beartown trilogy. This series has become one of my top series. It's like in the top 3 series of my favorite series of all time. Beartown I actually read twice last year. I reread it in December and then I read the second one, and then I took a little bit of a break between the second and this one because they do get a bit heavy. This one's kind of dense. It's very, very long. But Beartown's essentially about this very small isolated town, and ice hockey's at the center of it. So there's a lot of pressure on the boys to kind of win. Everything about the town kind of like sits on how the ice hockey team does. So something happens in that first book that just changes the trajectory of like the entire town, everyone's lives in the books, and you kind of just follow that throughout. I will say, please look up trigger warnings before you go into even the first one, but as you continue, definitely look up trigger warnings for the other ones, because Fredrik Backman does not shy away from talking about topics, and I love the way that he deals with them and talks about them. He handles them with so much care. This one specifically though, we have followed so many characters from the first one. We've like been introduced to so many new characters in the second one and even in this one, that by the time you get to this one and seeing like the fate of all of these characters, like you are so invested, you are just like connected to so many of them, that it's so scary to see like what he's going to do with these characters in their lives, especially since the first one, like some of them have gone through so much, you just want the best for them, but it's like Fredrik Backman just doesn't give them a break, and he kind of foreshadows throughout, I would say, the second one and the beginning of this one, kind of the ending of this book, so you're kind of prepared for the end of this one, but as, like when it comes, it's still just like, I can sit here and cry about it as I'm talking about it. Like this book is just so phenomenal, the way that he can write in so many characters' point of views, and it feels like he has lived in all these different lives. It's just, he knows how to be in every perspective and just do it such justice, and I'm just obsessed with the way he writes, and just like the storytelling is so amazing. I've never read storytelling quite like this. He's able to have kind of like a theme at the beginning of a chapter, and he'll just write like small little scenes throughout, but by the end of it, like everything just ties together so beautifully, and I'm just like in awe at his work and how he is as a writer and an author. So I'm obsessed with his writing and this series. I would highly recommend it, but again, please look up trigger warnings. This next book I cannot find for the life of me, but I really enjoyed it, so I know I did not get rid of it by any means. I just have no idea where I put it back on my shelves. So this next one is Pictures of You by Emma Gray. The summary of this one has always intrigued me, and I'm so happy I read it when I did because it was so fast paced, but it's basically about this girl who gets into an accident, and she actually is, I'm pretty sure, a fiance. She's about to get married or something like that, so she wakes up in the hospital hospital, and she has no memory from when she was like, I think 16 or 17 and beyond. So she thinks that she wakes up and she's still that age, and she wakes up and she goes on her phone and like she doesn't have the contact to her best friend. She's not in contact with her parents. So she's just trying to put puzzle pieces together, and it's so hard for her. But what I love so much about this one is it's not specifically a romance, because you also get the point of view of this character that was in her life when she was younger. So she can kind of like recognize him, but doesn't really know what their relationship was, but he does. He's there to kind of help her put the pieces back together, but he doesn't tell her that he knows her. So it's like the whole situation. But what I really liked about this one is it wasn't, like I said, focusing on like a romance of the story. It was very like drama. Like there's a lot of different things that come to light that she's finding out and you're finding out along with her, and different like plot twists and stuff that I just wasn't expecting. It's definitely a page turner, and the chapters are super short, so it's like I could not put it down. Like I needed to know what was going to happen and like what happened before in her life to get to where she was today. But what I also really enjoyed was when we got his point of view. He kind of gave us pieces to like her puzzle that was putting together that she didn't know yet. So like we knew, but she didn't know, so we were like waiting for her to find out. So there's a whole mystery element to it. So I really enjoyed that, and it was definitely fast-paced, bingeable page turner. But I don't want to give too much away, because I think you should go into this one blind, not knowing too much, just like the premise of it. So I would definitely recommend this one if you want a bingeable read. Then I read Beg, Borrow, or Steal by Sarah Adams. This one I think is the third one in the, what is this called? I swear it has a name. It's in this little interconnected series. We're following the male main character from the first one in the series, sisters throughout the rest of them. So this is the third? No, this is the second sister. Whatever. We're following Emily in this one. Emily has a nemesis, Jack. So they are actually both teachers, and they've just been nemesises. They have had a rivalry for many years now. She's in her small town, you know, and this small town is so charming. I love the way that Sarah Adams writes about it, because it's like that quintessential, you know, everyone knows each other, everyone's in everyone's business, and the way like the first chapter of this book, it truly tells it, because she's in like the hair salon chair and everyone's gossiping, and that's how she finds out that Jack, her nemesis, is back in town. He's actually moving and is actually her next door neighbor now. Their dynamic is really interesting, because you can tell in their point of view, like they don't shy away from acknowledging that they're attracted to each other. So you can see like the tension throughout the whole entire book. One day Emily gets a little too tipsy, too drunk, and she sends the manuscript to the romance book that she's writing to her boss. So she makes Jack tag along with her to figure out how to get this manuscript off of this man's computer, off of her boss's computer. And that's kind of like the fun romance plot of this one. This one actually might be my favorite so far in the series, because their banter was so good in here. Like I was eating up the banter, I was giggling, I was kicking my feet, and their growth of their relationship was really nice. Like it wasn't very sudden, but you can see them like get more connected with each other and kind of see each other and understand each other. But the rivalry that they have, it's fun for them to kind of like bicker with each other. It's like part of the charm. Another part of this that I really enjoyed was watching the sibling dynamic. It's a very prominent part of the series, and watching Emily come from this really dark spot that she's kind of in and come out of that a little bit more, I really enjoyed that part of it. And Sarah Adams' writing is just so fast-paced. These books are so good, really bingeable. If you're looking for a small town romance, I highly recommend them. You don't have to read them in order, but I would recommend doing that, because getting glimpses is always fun of the other siblings. But yeah, this one might be my favorite so far in the series. Then I read another book that has been one of my favorites so far this year, and it's actually called The Favorites by Lane Fargo. Now this book, I was getting kind of a little bit more popular right before I started reading it, and it was one of those books that wasn't like on my radar really, but I like put everything down. I was like, you know, I'm just gonna download this and I'm going to read it. It was like more of like a mood read choice, and it was the perfect choice to read at the moment, because I ate this book up. If you know anything about my reading, not my reading, about my taste in reading, it's that I love drama, I love toxic, and I love a relationship that they just like can't get away from each other, and that is like the epitome of this book. But mix in figure skating, it was just like the perfect combo. So we're following these two figure skaters, but the storytelling of it is so interesting, because there's a documentary coming out about them like a decade later, and it's following like the rise to their fame and like how they got to such a high level, but all of like the stuff that's happened between that's so dramatic and just like insane. Because we see from Katarina's point of view in the book of their start and how they met each other, their connection, and how the male main character kind of got into figure skating because of her, and their rise to all these different things and the different, you know, hardships that they went through and the different paths that they wanted to take. It's just so interesting because they have this connection. But Katarina is such a strong female main character, and she just like knows what she wants. So the documentary style in the interview was so interesting. It was so fast paced, and it was like you were on the edge of your seat, because in the interview it would be like kind of giving a foreshadow or like a situation that happened, and then you'd go into that chapter. It's like, I need to know what happened. I need to know the tea. I need to know what they they went through. And I think one thing that was really interesting about this is it kind of shows that you never really know truly what's going on in someone's life, especially like someone of like high status, like a figure skater, an athlete or whatever. And that part just made it like so engrossing. The storytelling was so amazing. I was just like on the edge of my seat kind of like the entire time. I just love reading about characters that are kind of messy, don't make perfect choices all the time, and have their mistakes, but are also incredibly obsessed with each other and aren't perfect. So I loved this story. It wasn't a 5-star exactly. I don't really know why I didn't get the 5-star feelings, but it was just like right up my alley, and I like absolutely loved the story of this one and the characters. I thought Katarina was such a strong female main character that like made mistakes but like also chased what she wanted. So I loved this book. Then I read another book by Lane Fargo because I was like, that was so good, and I know I have another book by her on my shelf, and that is They Never Learn. This is another one that I have no idea where I put on my shelf because I know I still have it, but nonetheless, I've had this book for a while. I actually started it a few years ago. I had like my bookmark in the book of where I started it, and then I put it down as just like softy Netflix. I wasn't in the mood for it, but I've heard like amazing things about it, so I went back to it because I read the favorites by her, and I was like, I need more. There's a theme over here because strong female main characters is what she writes about, because in this one we're following two. One of them is a professor at a school, and she is actually a serial killer. She kills men that have done wrong and boys that have done wrong. You know, she hunts them down specifically like at the school that she's at. And then we're following one of the students who's a new freshman at the school, and she becomes really close with her roommate, and something happens to her roommate, and she's trying to help her friend get revenge a little bit like that. So they're kind of almost on the same type of path. So it was really interesting to see like when their paths were going to cross and everything like that. But something happens in the school where the professor murders someone, and you don't really know why, so you're kind of trying to figure out like why she was targeting him, but something went wrong with it. So, you know, the police are coming in and like everything's closing in on her. She has to kind of like hide her tracks a little bit better. So this one wasn't my favorite only because it was really slow and it didn't feel very thrilling, like not really adrenaline rushing. And like I said, there's high stakes, but like you didn't feel too much of the high stakes, and it felt a bit slow. But I really loved the story of this one. It was so interesting. It got me. Like there was a plot twist like halfway through the book that I just did not see coming, and I absolutely loved that part of it. Like it really hooked me, but it wasn't like a page turner thriller, if you know what I mean. It was a good one. The story was really amazing, and I loved the writing of it. Also kind of short chapters if I'm not mistaken. I was definitely invested, but the pacing was a bit slow, like trying to find everything out by the end of it. But it was definitely a really good story. I would recommend this one. Then I read another mystery thriller type book that's actually really popular and has great reviews, and that's Jar of Hearts. I did not like this book, and I was so surprised because so many people liked it. So I think I have the unpopular opinion of really disliking this book. There was just like so much content in here that was so graphic that I feel like was so unnecessary. But the summary of this one is back years ago when they were in school. There's two best friends. We're following one of them. I forgot her name. Georgina. I almost called her Cecilia. We have Georgina, Angela, and then Georgina's boyfriend Calvin. All back in the day. Angela ends up murdered and Calvin goes away for it. So Georgina's boyfriend goes away for it, and now she is on the trial because she had a part in it, and we don't know what part she had in it. So she ends up going to jail for not a very long time, but we do follow her into jail for like the first 20% of the book, which that part felt so unnecessary. Like we did not need to see that because she gets out and then the story kind of really starts because there's a murder that's happening present day now that kind of relates back to how her best friend was murdered. So it's like, is the same killer, like is the boyfriend back out again, like what's going on, who's doing these murders? And it was so predictable. Like I'm so surprised that so many people were taken by surprise by the end of this, because I feel like the pieces come together so easily to like figure out the ending and everything like that. Like I put the pieces together so quickly. Not to flex, but please look up trigger warnings because it is graphic scenes of what I'm talking about, of what the trigger is, and multiple times. Like this doesn't just happen once in the book, multiple times, and some of the other times it just felt so unnecessary, and I just like did not like reading about it. I didn't like the story, I did not like the characters, I didn't like the pacing, I didn't like the writing. Like nothing about this I really enjoyed. There were like a few parts that I was like kind of on the edge of my seat, but like I would not recommend this one. And I was so surprised. I thought I was gonna love it because there's so many great reviews about it, but I really didn't like it. Now going into February, I read 7 books in February, and the first one I read was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is my first book by this author. I was really excited about it. The summary of this one is so interesting, and it's basically about these two friends. I wouldn't say they're like besties by any means, but they're kind of like civil friends. They went to school together. They're both writers. They're both authors now, and Athena is the more successful one, but we're following in June, I think it's Juniper, her point of view. So one day they're getting food, they go back to Juniper's apartment, I'm pretty sure, or it was Athena's apartment, someone's apartment, and Athena ends up dying, and Juniper steals her manuscript to one of her books. And like I said, Athena is so much more successful in the writer field, and Juniper's a bit jealous about that, so she steals her manuscript and she kind of like tweaks it, puts it in her own stories, and publishes it. So she's kind of like sitting with the guilt of it, but she's also becoming such a successful author, but it's also from stolen works. There's a lot of like blurred lines in this story, and what was so interesting about it is because Athena came from Chinese descent, and her story was about Chinese history and like all of this stuff that they've gone through. So like it was about her personal history, and the way that Juniper steals, like she's a white woman writing about a Chinese history, stolen work from a Chinese woman, and it again blurs so many lines, and then people start finding out more and more, and like she gets so high of the fame that she starts like crumbling down, and people are like finding out about it. So she's sitting in the guilt a little bit. She's also getting the high of becoming such a successful author. So there's all of this going on that she's trying to wrap her mind around. What I've liked a lot about this one was the satirical like humor that was thrown into this. It wasn't very like serious in a lot of moments, but we could see Juniper like spiraling, and in her head how fast she's spiraling, and it's like so morally interesting because it's like she's not doing something that's morally correct. But it was very interesting following the story because it's like, you know, that she's going to have her downfall. Like at some point someone's gonna find out about it. So I will say the ending of it wasn't my favorite, and the second half of it felt a bit repetitive and a bit slow to me. Like we got to like the height of it, we got to the fall of it, and then there was a little bit more towards the end of it that I was like kind of getting bored, and I was like, we could probably wrap this up. And the ending was very interesting. I didn't love the ending of it. I'm glad that I started with this one as my first R.F. Kuang book, because I definitely want to read a few of her other ones that she's come out with, and I was told to read this one first, and I'm glad I did. Again, it's a very interesting summary and definitely an interesting book. I would definitely recommend it. Then I read a little short story by Fredrik Backman called The Answer Is No. I will read anything he writes at this point. I have a few other books that he's come out with that I need to read, but this one was his like most recent release. I didn't give this one a rating, but I think on Fable I had to give, well, I didn't have to give it a rating, but I didn't. I gave it like 3 stars just because like it's short, there's like not much to it, but it's so crazy how he can take such a small little story but have so much meaning in it. But it's basically about this character who prefers being like in his solitude by himself. He does not want to talk to anyone, any of his neighbors, and he lives in this apartment building. There's this misplaced frying pan, and the people that kind of like are in charge of the building are coming to question him, and his neighbors get involved, and the pile keeps piling up and up and up, and then you see him kind of just wanting to be by himself, but everyone's like annoying him, and it's very endearing seeing his point of view because he's so annoyed by everyone, but his neighbors are like funny and charming and also kind of annoying, and it's just like there's so many different emotions that Fredrik Backman like can get out of you in such a little story, and he did an amazing job in this one. It's such a silly story, but again, there's like little meanings behind a lot of things. There's a quote in here that I really liked, but it was short, it was sweet, I love his writing, so I had a good time. Then I read This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. I was so excited about this one because I loved the first book, and the third book's coming out soon, so I was like, okay, I need to get into this one. And this was the story after I read the first one that I was most excited about because we're following 3 best friends in this series. They're interconnected. You don't need to read the first one to read this one, but I really loved the story of the first one. This one we're following Soledad, and her entire life is planned out. You know, she has 3 beautiful daughters, she has a husband, they may not be getting completely along, but they've been married for like a decade or more, like a really long time. They've had a long marriage, and then something happens with her husband that he's just been lying to them for a really long time about so many things, and he actually gets just like sent away. I'm not gonna say exactly what happens because there's parts of this that are very interesting to find out as you're reading, but she has to kind of start from the ground up, and there's so much stress on her. It's very overwhelming. There's no time for her to really grieve anything that she's lost. You know, she has to keep the roof over her daughter's head, she needs to make some more money, you know, all this stuff. And then the male main character comes into the picture, Judah, and he is trying to help them out because he sees how much they have lost, and he sees how Soledad is as a person, and she's trying her best, but she's like, can I trust him? Because there's other situations going on that he's entangled with. So this story is more women's fiction than it is romance, but the little romances that you get is just so amazing, because you know when you're reading a book that's not focusing on a romance, and then you get those snippets and it hits even harder because it's like you're yearning for them, and that kind of is what's in this book. The main, I think, focus on this story is Soledad and her going from losing everything to really building up and finding herself again. Seeing her find her passion and seeing her best friends, you know, cheer her on. I loved that so much, and I always say I love female relationships in books, and like all of the female relationships going on in this book are so wonderful and done so beautifully, and I love reading about that. Kennedy Ryan is so good at doing that, and her books feel so realistic. Like her characters feel so three-dimensional, and they feel like real people going through real life things that I think a lot of people in real life can relate to. So Really enjoyed this one. I cannot wait for the next one. I think the next one might be my favorite. I thought this one was gonna be, but we got little hints of the third best friend and her story, and I'm just really, really excited about that one. Then I read, wait for it, by Mariana Zapata. I actually read 2 Mariana Zapata books like 3-ish years ago. I didn't love them. I know they're very, very slow burn. Like, she's the queen of slow burn. I'm talking they don't hold hands or really like make eye contact until like 50-60% of the way through the book. So you're kind of like, again, yearning for the little romances, and this story I really, really enjoyed because we have our female main character Diana. She's going through a lot. She's raising 2 little boys. She moves into a new house. Across the street is our male main character. You're kind of just following their day-to-day life. There's not much of a plot in this one of her raising these 2 boys, getting thrown into this new life, you know, getting into a new neighborhood, meeting new people. Dallas is so mysterious. Like, he just does not give up a lot. He doesn't talk a lot, but he kind of shows through his actions that he cares, and the way that he gradually sees Diana and like what she needs, and as a single mother right now, how she's doing, how she's feeling. Like, he steps in and his actions speak so much louder than his words, and it is so good. Like, I didn't expect to like this as much as I did, but the slow burn of it was exactly what I needed, and it was just like almost so painfully slow that I was like, please, like, I don't know, hold her hand. He'll say something really subtle and it just like hits so much harder because you haven't gotten to any of the romance. But it was really, really nice seeing Diana. She's such a strong character, again, being thrown into this life and raising these 2 kids and starting over again, and it was just really nice seeing her find herself, but also, again, seeing Dallas step in a little bit, and all of the side characters were also really, really fun. And again, it doesn't really have much of a plot, more character driven, but I really enjoyed this one. Then I read First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. This is a little romance book. It's perfect for Valentine's Day. I did like it. It's not my favorite romance book, but if you're gonna read this, wait for next Valentine's Day or next February, because it's like the perfect like romance book to read during that season. So Lucy is a single mother. Her daughter ends up calling into this radio hotline, like this love hotline that our male main character Aiden is the host of, and she's calling in to help her mom find love, but her mom Lucy just doesn't know that she's doing that, so she catches her, gets on the call, and they have a little conversation, her and Aiden, and that raises the ratings of this radio show so much because it's not really doing very well. Aiden doesn't really like doing it. He's not very into like the whole theme of love, which is like the theme of the the radio show. He doesn't believe in love and everything like that, so ratings are low. So when the daughter calls in and Lucy gets on the phone, ratings get up so high that they offer Lucy a job to be the co-host on the radio show. And that's one thing that I really, really loved about this book, because the professions in here were so interesting. I've never read, you know, a radio host, and specifically about this, like, they're in close quarters, so the tension's really high, and their chemistry is really good in the beginning, and the way that Aiden acts, like, he's not into love or anything like that. They're trying to find her someone to go on dates with on the show, so it's like seeing him get jealous and everything like that, and seeing her go on these horrible dates and like Aiden stepping in. So the beginning of this I really, really enjoyed. And then Lucy's also, I'm pretty sure, a mechanic, so seeing her profession that you don't really see a lot of women in these books have was really, really fun, because she has also these coworkers that are really entertaining to read about. I think like halfway through this I just like completely checked out because I got the ick, and you know when you get the ick you just don't come back from that. Aiden was like saying things and doing things that I was just like so turned off by, and it was just like a personal thing. Like, it was such silly little things. I didn't like Aiden as a character. He felt like very unreliable, and I felt like Lucy was looking for someone that was so confident and like knew what they wanted, and what they wanted was her, and I don't think Aiden was really that. He wasn't like using his words, and like you can tell through his actions that he liked her and he cared for her, but like he would not say it, and he would like backtrack on it. It was just like annoying me so much. I was like, he was not stable enough for her, and he did not want to be in a relationship as much as she was like looking for love, because she's a hopeless romantic, which I love so much. I really enjoyed Lucy's character. I think that also the premise of the story is really interesting. The setup was really fun, but I just didn't like our male main character. Then I read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. Now this one's not my favorite by her. It actually might be my least favorite book by Ali Hazelwood, which is really upsetting. But this is a college romance story. Lucas just gets out of a relationship with his girlfriend, who's also Scarlett's like teammate and soon to be best friend. So it's very like interesting triangle going on, but they break up because they're not compatible in the bedroom, but they find out that Lucas and Scarlett are. So the best friend one day is like, you guys are compatible like that, so you guys should get together. And that part was just really weird to me, because I was like, I don't know, it's like your new best friend and like his recent ex telling you guys to get together. Like, that's just, it just screams messy. That one character, what's the best friend's name? Pen? I think her name is Pen or something like that. Oh my god, she ruined this book. She was so annoying, and also Scarlett brought her up every chance that she could get. and it was just like kind of annoying. There was so much happening and so many different plot lines that it just completely lost me. Like Scarlet and her therapist, that it just like doesn't round out. Like she's lying to her therapist and all of this, and then, you know, they're both on this like STEM journey together, and that part just doesn't feel very well rounded. And then they're both divers, and she's on a diver's block, and she's trying to figure that out, so she's going to therapy for it. And then you have them in the bedroom and their relationship, like intimacy, and it felt very physical at first. So I was like, is this gonna have an emotional connection? There's like 3 other storylines going on aside of that. Like there's so much happening that it was like I couldn't really focus on like the main story of like the romance and the relationship, so it just like really lost me. Not my favorite. The way that she writes is just so distinct to Ali Hazelwood, and I really appreciate that. It was also very fast-paced as usual, but not my favorite story to follow along with, not my favorite characters. And oh, I also forgot to say, during this one you get kind of like a warning, not a warning, but like it's said in the beginning that there's kind of like a kink talked about, and that part I appreciated, but it felt very much played up, and you don't really get as much as you expect that you're gonna get into this book. What I did like is the openness that they had, and like trust these 2 characters needed with each other for the bedroom, and I liked the openness of Ali Hazelwood talking about that, you know, a female main character being open with her sexuality and everything like that. Like I enjoyed that part of it, but it felt very like played up in the beginning, and then we kind of lost that as well. Like all of the plot points that were brought up in the beginning, the very like prevalent ones, all like slowly trickled down, and then we just started focusing on that best friend Pen, and she was just so annoying. Like she ruined this book for me. The last book I read in February was Rebel Witch. This is the last book in the duology of the Crimson Moth Heartless Hunter duology. So the general story of this duology is we're following Rune, who's a witch, and she is also like a secret vigilante called the Crimson Moth. So she's rescuing witches because there's witch hunters, and Gideon, our main character, is a witch hunter, and Rune is posing as like this really rich socialite who's just very dumb and doesn't know what's going on, and they're both trying to get information about each other with each other, but they don't know that like they're both playing each other. It's so interesting in the beginning, so fast paced, but the second one was really entertaining. It did what it had to do, you know, it had all the good romantic-y tropes, but like in the right places. The stakes were so high, because like they're on so different sides of the enemy territory that's like you can't fathom them being able to be together. So the stakes, again, very high, and I really liked the storyline of the second one. It was very fast paced, very bingeable. The romantic was really good, because you can tell after the first one into this one that they really care for each other, but it's like they have their loyalties, and their loyalties lie not with each other. So it was like a true enemies to lover situation. It's nothing I feel like groundbreaking in the romantasy world, and like what was happening felt a bit predictable, but for what it was, I was entertained, I had a great time, a fast-paced read, and I love this duology. I think it is so much fun. So in March, this most recent month, I've read 6 books, and the first one I read was Scythe and Sparrow by Brynne Weaver. This is the 3rd and final book in the Ruinous Love trilogy. The first book has been my favorite. This one's my second favorite, and then the second one I just did not like. So I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this one, because the first one might be a hit, the second one I really didn't enjoy, so I was like, am I gonna like this? But I thought the storyline and like the summary of these characters was very interesting. So Rose, our female main character, actually works at a circus, and she is a motorcycle performer. She also does tarot cards, so I thought that profession side of it was really interesting. And then we have Fionn, which I think I'm saying his name wrong. I'm pretty sure I said it the whole reading vlog completely wrong, but he is a doctor, and she gets injured one day, and she just like runs to the first, I guess, office that she sees, and it happens to be his doctor's office. So he immediately starts helping her, and to help heal her, she is now staying at his house. But their relationship is a bit complex, because she is also in this like little business of getting revenge on men, but every time she does that, like things go wrong, so the trail is coming back to her, so they're kind of trying to like not be out like in the spotlight so she doesn't get caught. Our male main character has moved to the small town that she's healing at now, and he moved there because of his past. Like he wanted to get away from it. And what I really liked about this one was Rose was so authentically herself that she was able to bring out the true side of him, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it was nice to see, and these books are just so entertaining and so outlandish. It's like the rom-com mixed with serial killing. It's just such an interesting combination, but it's so entertaining. It's like you never really know what's gonna happen or what these characters are gonna say, but I am entertained the whole time. I felt like the plot of this one got lost a few times, but I had a good enough time while reading it. It was fast-paced, and I would recommend this trilogy if you want something that's kind of like dark romancy, but make it have humor and have a little bit of the comedy mixed within it. Then I read Homeseeking by Carissa Chen. This is actually her debut novel, which is just so astounding to me, because this is such... I loved this story. And like I said, I want to get more into historical fiction this year, so I'm so happy I picked this one up. And it had a history in here that I just didn't really know anything about, honestly, so I was interested in that. And then also the beginning of this I talked about in my reading vlog with this book, but the author kind of explains some of the stuff that's talked about in here. She says, like, if you find yourself confused, like, don't give up. You might take a moment to imagine what it must be like for those who have to navigate this on a daily basis. Like, kind of explaining what you're going to be getting in the story and the stuff that these characters go through. Like, don't give up trying to understand them, basically. But this story follows two characters who, I think they were like 7 when they first met. They lived in Shanghai years and years and years ago. Again, this is historical fiction, and they had this like incredible connection. But the way it's told is so interesting. The storytelling of this was my favorite part, because we're following our female main character from the past to the present, and in present day, it's 60 years later. They haven't seen each other in years since our male main character, when he was younger, when he was like 17-ish, enlisted into the war. He went off, and they haven't seen each other maybe like once within all these years, and now they're in their like 70s, 80s, or they're very old, and they finally see each other for the first time again in Los Angeles at a supermarket. And like their first interaction, you see them seeing each other again. It's like so much has gone on between these years since they last saw each other, and it's just the story of like what's happened between, and so much has happened, and they've gone through so much. Like I said, the female main character's point of view is from the past to the present, and then the male main character's point of view is from the present to the past. So you're kind of seeing them tell the story, and then it like kind of connects throughout the middle, and then you get the whole picture. So again, the storytelling of it is so interesting, and it has the history, like I said, that I don't know much about. So it was very interesting reading about that and seeing what they went through, and just like the romance that was sprinkled in here. Like I said, their connection was so amazing. They grew up together and went through these times together. Their connection was just so authentic, but then seeing everything that they went through to get to where they were today, it was so interesting seeing their lives and how they went from where they started to Los Angeles, California, with families and husbands and wives and everything. So I really, really liked this one. Again, it was her debut novel, so it was a very good read, but also a very emotional read. Then I read The Book of Azrael by Amber V. Nicole. This is part of the Gods and Monsters series. This is the first book in the series. This is an urban fantasy. It's a very, very interesting summary. It's very unique, which I really like, and I don't read a lot of urban fantasy, so that was really interesting. I didn't realize it was until like they were talking on the phone. They were dressed in like normal, like present day, modern day clothing, and I was like, what is going on? But basically there's two sides to this territory. There's monsters and there's gods. Obviously, it's the name of the series, but our female main character, Diana, she is part of the monsters, and she has sold her life to this person that's kind of above her and like kind of in control of all of the monsters around. She did that in order to save her sister, so now she's under his rule, and she's the morally gray character. You know, she's doing all this and fighting and killing in order to keep her sister safe, so you see where her loyalty lies and see how she became where she is. But she's one of like the top monsters, and she's able to like form into all these different things, so that part's like pretty interesting. And then you have the god side, which our male main character's on. His like modern day name is Liam, and there was a God's War years and years and years ago, and he lost a lot during that war. So he's isolated himself for literally centuries by himself and just is buried down in the dumps. But then the monsters are trying to find the Book of Azrael, and he gets a note of that. So he comes back to his people, hasn't seen anyone in centuries, and they kind of like team up for like their own different reasons and everything like that. So it is a true enemies to lovers, and I think the romance mix with the fantasy in the beginning was really, really good, because you have a very, very slow burn. You have a really slow build up of the story, but the fantasy was so, like I said, refreshing, very unique, and then also the romance was so slow. But then in the middle, it lost me a little bit. I think we focused more on the romance. The relationship in here was very, very, what's the word? I don't want to say refreshing again, but it was really nice to read about, because they connected more on an emotional level, and I really enjoyed that, because usually I feel like there's more of like a physical connection and banter in the beginning of these type of like romantasy books, but they definitely connected emotionally, and then eventually you see how they've connected, but they're still in enemy territory. You know that there's truce that they have to fulfill by the end of it, and then we get back into the fantasy, and the ending was a bit predictable. But yeah, this book was just really insanely slow paced. Like I felt like I was reading this for months at some points, and it was just so slow that it kind of like lost me, like I said, in the middle, and I kind of checked out of it, and I just wanted it to kind of be over. But it was very unique. Like I said, I really liked the plot of the story, and I also really liked the romance. It was honestly just like the writing and the pacing of it that lost me, but it was a good book. Then I read Out of the Woods by Hannah Bonham Young. This is her newest release. It's the best friends from Out on a Limb, and I loved that book, and I was so excited to read about them, because they have actually been married for a long time. They've been together since they were like really, really young. Like they have a very long-term relationship. They've been together longer than they haven't at this point, and I feel like we don't really see a lot of romances about a relationship that's long-term and seeing the struggles within that. We usually see like the firsts and everything. So we're really following Sarah's point of view, our female main character, and she is actually going through a hard time because she's realizing like who is she without Caleb, because they've been together for so long. She's kind of lost her self-identity. So she pitches, or her best friend pitches, and she decides it's the right path for them to go on this like wilderness therapy therapy trip, you know, no phones, we're gonna step out of reality, we're gonna reconnect and everything. And they're just on like two different perspectives. And I always say like communication is key in a long-term relationship. You know, you need to be like understanding your partner's perspective on everything, and they've kind of like lost that along the way, which is so normal in a long-term relationship. You get into your ruts and you get into your routine. So I think this was a very healthy way for them to kind of connect again, step out of reality. But the actual story wasn't my favorite. I think the plot was entertaining, but I wish we got more of their history back in the day. We did get like past chapters. They were very, very short, but they were more focusing on Sarah and her relationship with her mother, which I think is important to see how she became who she is like in present day. But I wish in those past chapters we got more of their history, and I think it would have been so amazing if we got some Caleb point of view in here, because he's the other half of this long-term relationship. Like, he also has some issues that he wants to bring up and stuff, but I would have enjoyed it, I think, a little bit more seeing his perspective on some things. But yeah, it was still a good book. Then I read God of Malice by Rena Kent. This is my first like true dark romance book, and it was just like, I guess kind of what I expected, like also not really. But what's interesting about this, it takes place at like a college in the UK. There's two rival schools. One is like REU and the other one's like, I forget the name of them, but it's like the UK and the American schools, and they are rivals because like their parents were like legacies there, and it just like stems from them, and it went to the children that are now these books. But this one we're following Killian and Glyndon, and Killian just takes this interesting obsession with Glyndon. There's kind of like a reason for it, but also not really, because Killian is a psychopath, and that's not me being like funny. Like, he's genuinely a psychopath, and like his tendencies, like he has no emotions. And Glyndon catches on to that pretty early because she has, you know, family members that are kind of the same. And what's interesting about this one is they're all interconnected. So you see so many side characters, like best friends and friend groups and brothers and cousins. Like, everyone's interconnected so hard. That's kind of like really what's happening. There's not much of a plot on here, but the things that come out of Killian's mouth was literally like jaw-dropping. Like, there's no way a 19-year-old in school that should be in class is saying those words right now. Like, it just was like mind-blowing, because it's just so unrealistic. I would say 100% actually look up trigger warnings before going into this book. I wouldn't say I'm really into dark romances now. I didn't rate this book, but I want to continue the series because the side characters are so prevalent in this book that you want to know their stories and like what's going on with them, like behind the scenes of this one. It's bingeable. It literally feels like Wattpad. I said in the reading vlog, it felt like I was like thrown back to 2012, sitting in bed middle of the night reading the most outlandish dark romance fanfic of my life, and that's like the epitome of this book. So do with that what you will. Maybe try it out if you want to get into dark romance. I don't know. I'm not the person to come to, but please look up trigger warnings is all I'll say. And then my most recent read in the last book of March that I read is Promise Me Sunshine by Cara Bastone. I really enjoyed this book, and you know, the beginning of this one I did not get good first impressions of our characters. So we're following our main character Lenny, and she's actually going through a grieving process, and she's grieving her best friend that she lost pretty recently, and she recently got a babysitting job. It's just like a small like short gig, but she meets the uncle of the girl that she's babysitting, and he is very, very grumpy and not very nice, and horrible first impression. Lenny's first impression I didn't love because she's very cringy. Like, I don't know how to really explain the way she like acts and does things, but it's just like so cringy. But like it's her personality, so like some points it's like kind of charming. But Miles' first impression, I was like, I do not like him. I cannot see him, you know, growing and having character development, and I cannot see a romance happening between these two characters. But the story is such a slow burn, and what I realized that the romance is also a slow burn because Lenny's going through such a difficult time. Like, you can't have a romance happen when someone is grieving so hard, and Miles steps in. Like, he is literally like an angel sent down to help her go through this process because he's been through a lot of grieving himself. So the way that he steps in and helps her get through it, it was just so wonderful, and it's so unexpected from the Miles you meet in the beginning. Like, his character development is actually so amazing. By the end of this, I absolutely loved him, and I loved their relationship. Like, he let her grieve, and it felt very realistic. Like, I loved the depiction of grief in this and the way the author wrote about it so genuinely, because it's like grieving, like by the end of the book, like Lenny's not completely like fixed. Like, she's not done grieving. Like, it's with you your whole life, but it may get easier, you know, if you have a companion with you like Miles, or if you just like take the time to like sit in it. Like, it's gonna hit you sometimes, but other times you're gonna feel better, and you shouldn't feel guilty for that. So I really loved the perspective of grief in this and the way that she wrote about it. And then by the end of it, Miles and Lenny were just so sweet. Like, they really were sweet, and I love that Miles let her take her time to like figure out the grieving process and go through all these things and make new friends and like push her to do things before the romance really started, and he like allowed himself to like act on how much he cared and everything. So I really enjoyed this one. I love the author's writing. She does so much of showing rather than telling, and I love that so much. Like the way she describes a few things that feel very like straightforward are just so beautiful and so wonderful, and I really enjoyed this. At first I was kind of iffy. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, but I ended up really enjoying this one. Okay, now that I have yapped your entire ear off, I think you guys are probably done with listening to me for the foreseeable future. I'm going to sign off now. Those are all of the 22 books I've read so far this year. Let me know if you've read any of them. Let me know if there's any books you think I should read after seeing the ones I've rated a bit more highly. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all hopefully in the next one. Bye!